Good morning, everyone. Now that everyone is sitting down, I'm going to ask the audience to please arise for the national anthem of Ukraine. Thank you very much. We're grateful to the choir Dzherelo, which translates to the source, representing the Ukrainian Center, Utah, for this rendition of the national anthem of Ukraine. On behalf of Utah Valley University, we welcome you to the 5th edition of the Utah Diplomatic Conference. Thank you to those who are here in person, as well as to those watching online. We'll probably see quite a bit of mobility between classes. Typically, classes starts at the hour, so we'll probably see more influx of individuals coming in and out, but many of them are actually following these proceedings over the internet through our YouTube channel. My name is Baldomero Lago, and I'm the Chief International Officer here at Utah Valley University, and at this time I would like to recognize our distinguished guests. And I will start introducing the Consul General of Ukraine, the Honorable Dmitry Kushniruk. We also have the Consul General of Romania, Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu, that actually happens to be the Dean of the Los Angeles Consular Corps. The Consul General of the Kingdom of Spain, Ambassador Juan Carlos Sanchez Alonso. The Consul for Legal Affairs of the Republic of Poland, the Honorable Dobrosława Semionowska. The Director of the U.S. Department, Office of Foreign Missions, also based in Los Angeles, the Honorable Denise Shen. And later on, the Political Unit Chief of the Office of Eastern Europe Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, the Honorable Ryan Gillinger. He will be joining us. We also have with us the Honorary Consul of Ukraine, Mr. Jonathan Freedman, and also the Honorary Consul of Romania, Mr. Mircea Diviriescan. We're grateful to Marina Stores for organizing the choir and the display on Ukraine. We're also grateful to the Office for Global Engagement staff, the UVU Broadcasting and Audiovisual Services, and the University Academic Administration for the support of this event. Once again, my heartfelt thank you to the choir for your beautiful rendition, and later on we'll be able to hear them again. At this point now, we will hear first from Dr. Kathren Brown. She is the Deputy Provost and Professor of Russian History here at Utah Valley University. Following Dr. Brown, we'll have the honor to hear from the Honorable Denise Shen, again, she's the Director of the Office of Foreign Missions at the Department of State, based in Los Angeles. Then we will last hear from the Honorable Jonathan Freedman. He is the Honorary Consul of Ukraine in Utah. After his remarks, we will hear again from the choir 2 musical numbers. One of them is titled Red Verbimen Bush, Chervona Kiliana, and then My Thoughts, Dumi Moi. So we'll proceed to that point. So Dr. Brown?
Thank you, everyone, for being here. In addition, I'd like to thank Dr. Steven Seegel from University of Texas, Austin, for being with us today, and he will be delivering a keynote later today. It's a very interesting time, as I'm sure goes unsaid, but I said it anyway. A year and a month or so ago, Russia aggressed Ukraine in the first European aggression since the Second World War. And once again, Eastern and Central Europe were thrown into confusion. This is a significant point of time. 80 years ago, Europe certainly played a much larger role in the world. However, it continues to be one of the greatest collective powers in the world, and this unbalancing of the European order has significant historical ramifications. As a child of the Cold War, and I'm sure many of you are as well, seeing the sabers of the nuclear weapons being rattled again is a bit unsettling. We all thought we were done with that and would have preferred it that way, but alas, that has not happened. So this conference is significant for those of you here in person and those of you online, in the sense that it's giving you a glimpse into the events after a year of digestion, so to speak. What has happened? How has it affected our friends, our colleagues in Europe? How has it affected those countries closest to Ukraine? And how has it affected Ukraine and the Ukrainian people? I think many of us have made great efforts to show our support as far away as we are through a variety of means, and I hope that support continues. And I am heartened by the numbers of folks who are here and online to offer that support. So I welcome you to a great day full of fantastic speeches. Get to know these folks, have an opportunity to talk with them. For our students who are not children of the Cold War, this is an amazing opportunity to speak with folks who are living this reality much more closely every day. And same for our faculty, for our staff, and for our community members. Please mingle with our community members who can also give you a great perspective on how the war is affecting folks. And I am hoping that next year, any welcoming remarks will include the peace that has happened. Fingers crossed. So thank you, everyone, for coming, and I will turn it back over.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. We will hear now from the Honorable Denise Shen, Director of the Office of Foreign Missions at the Department of State.
Good morning, everyone. As Baldomero said, I am the U.S. Department of State's Regional Director for the Office of Foreign Missions. First, I really want to express my deep appreciation for Utah Valley University for hosting this annual conference on international relations. It is really so important for state and local institutions, academia, civil society, and others to really raise awareness in the United States on global issues, as these developments invariably affect our domestic context. As you know, the U.S. Department of State is responsible for formulating and implementing our foreign policy overseas through our leadership in Washington and our ambassadors and embassies and consulates. Within the State Department, the Office of Foreign Missions has a bit of a unique role in that we are domestic focused. We are the main diplomatic liaison with the foreign embassies and consulates that are resident here in the United States. We work hand in hand with them to ensure that they can do their work of diplomacy because it is in our mutual interest. We also help connect foreign embassies and consulates with state and local partners, as well as with our embassies overseas to facilitate engagement and cooperation. We collaborate on various initiatives like promoting commercial linkages, academic exchanges, people-to-people ties, and important events such as this conference on Ukraine. It is an honor to be here with the foreign consulates and to have my colleague from the State Department participate on this esteemed panel. All of the foreign mission representatives here are supporting our bilateral relationship. They are sharing their unique perspectives and helping to solidify, right here with our American audience, a greater understanding of why the invasion of Ukraine matters and why our partners and allies matter. As you well know, no country is immune from international relations or the global context. We've seen how it has affected our health through the global pandemic. We've seen how it affects our economy, global food security. The national security that we enjoy each day here, often without thinking about it, is impacted by the foreign policy decisions that we and the rest of the world make. As President Biden and Secretary Blinken have said, it was President Putin's decision to invade Ukraine that has brought us where we are today, inflicting suffering in Ukraine and threatening global stability and security. No country has endured greater hardship from Russia's war than Ukraine, but almost every country from Europe to Africa has also felt the pain. But nations around the world continue to stand with Ukraine. This is because we recognize that if we do not support Ukraine, we abandon the very principles and rules of the UN Charter that make all countries safer and more secure. The U.S. will continue to stand with Ukraine until its sovereignty is respected and the people of Ukraine can shape their own future in freedom and peace. So I really want to thank all of you for being here today. Thank you for being interested and engaged in Ukraine and in international affairs. It gives me great optimism to see all of you and inspiring with your intelligence, your creativity, your motivation, and your ambition to see positive change in the world. You will no doubt be drivers for promoting awareness and understanding of global issues among your peers and with the broader public here. And we absolutely need you in this endeavor. So on behalf of the U.S. Department of State, thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here. Thank you to Utah Valley University for hosting such an important conference. We're very appreciative to our host, to Baldomero Lago and his team for putting this on. It's been a distinct privilege over the last 15 years to serve as the Ukrainian Honorary Consul here in the state of Utah, and most meaningful over the last 13 months. Utah watched, along with the rest of the world, as Vladimir Putin and his inner circle invaded a peaceful and sovereign nation. He began a war of terror that continues today, committing war crimes against innocent civilians. This has been an unprovoked and an illegal war. Ukraine has been the underdog from the beginning. It was so improbable that a small nation with a military a fraction the size of Russia could defend itself against such a force. However, Ukraine has inspired the world by the courage and passion of her people and leadership. With great resolve, they have defended their families, their freedom, and their land. International support has been vital, as was said, and it must continue until Putin is defeated, peace is restored, and Ukraine is rebuilt. The Ukrainian consulate office here in Utah has been very busy over the last 13 months, as the response from Utah has been remarkable, truly phenomenal. This state was established by religious refugees that have fled the West, or fled to the West, seeking freedom and safety. It is in Utahns' DNA to stand and support those that are oppressed by tyranny. As Honorary Consul here, representing Ukraine, my role is basically threefold. I support Ukrainian nationals that live here in the state, foster economic development between Utah and Ukraine, and promote cultural exchange promote Ukrainian cultural exchanges here within Utah. But I'd love to highlight for you just a few things a handful of things that have happened over the last 13 months. I could not be more proud to live in Utah. The Utah governor, and within just, a day of the full-scale invasion, the Utah governor and First Lady Cox spearheaded a big push for aid and welcoming refugees. Utah is uniquely situated to welcome refugees, and we take a disproportionate amount historically. Within days of the full-scale invasion, several rallies were held at the Utah State Capitol, where the governor, lieutenant governor, Senate president, and Salt Lake mayor all spoke, among others. The entire Utah legislature attended and unfurled large streams of blue and yellow overhead. It was truly an amazing sight in showing their support. It was the first time in Utah state history that a foreign flag was raised on the state capitol building, when they raised the Ukrainian flag. It was the second time in state history that the Utah Capitol and many other government buildings were awash in foreign colors, in the Ukrainian colors. The first time, by the way, was when Utah hosted the Winter Olympics in 2002. The member countries of the Utah Consular Corps, this is within a day of the invasion, issued a joint declaration of support for Ukraine, denouncing the actions of Vladimir Putin and his inner circle. Hundreds of Utah businesses, NGOs, and individuals mobilized, raising tens of millions of dollars and sending all forms of aid and volunteers to Ukraine and surrounding countries to support refugees displaced inside and outside of Ukraine, and those fighting on the front lines. I'll just also note, this was just amazing. I was receiving several hundred emails from Utahns that wanted to go and fight in Ukraine. And I just wish I had the time to share one or two with you. But they were incredibly heartfelt and sincere, by people that do not speak the language, have never been to Ukraine, do not necessarily know Ukrainians, but were willing, and they said this in their letters, were willing to lay down their lives to support freedom globally. It was incredible. I would find myself, as you can tell, weeping at my computer, reading these messages and getting in touch with these individuals that did end up going to Ukraine. Medical supplies and equipment, body armor, generators, so much more have been procured both locally and sent by plane, by container to Ukraine, and also procured locally in Europe. for obvious reasons, cost savings, time savings. We have the August mission is represented here today, and they are a group of ex-military, incredibly nimble and scrappy, and have done such a profound job in supporting not only refugees, but frontline fighters. Governments within Ukraine that whose populations have doubled in size just from internal displacement, and hospital supplies and equipment, just very badly needed supplies and equipment. And so I'm so grateful to Bruce Roberts and his team for their tremendous support on the ground. It's not easy to get all these supplies across the border. It's not easy to get them into the right hands, to the people that actually really need it and are situated in such that they can make a difference. And these guys have done just a phenomenal job, so I applaud them. Utahns of all ages have done what they can to show their love and support. The First Lady, Abby Cox, solicited tens of thousands. I mean, it could be 100,000. It was a lot of letters from Utah school children that were taken over to Ukraine and passed out in refugee camps at the border and as well as inside the country. And I wish I could show you some pictures. They're just the cutest pictures of these Ukrainian school children that get these messages of hope and support and love. I want to express my gratitude to all those that put this conference together, as I said, and to address such an urgent need. Thank you to Utah and the international community for your meaningful support of Ukrainians on the front lines and around the world. And I would be remiss if I did not thank the Utah Ukrainian Association, who's represented here by this beautiful group of people. They have worked tirelessly to unite the Ukrainian community here, which has more than doubled in the last 13 months, as we open our homes and our hearts to those fleeing here for safety. They've done such a wonderful job in building this community and showing support and raising money for body armor, for generators and other needs, getting it to specific families. Many of these individuals have friends and family that are still there. I'm looking at Marina in the red right here. Her family's in Sumy, and it's a treacherous situation. You know, it's really hard to fathom. So we just send our love and support to the families of those that have been able to reach Utah that are still in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Thank you for putting this on, and yes, thank you.
червона калино, маєш білий цвіт. Не журися, славна Україно, маєш добрий рід. А ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну, гей-гей, розвеселимо. А ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну, гей-гей, розвеселимо. Виступаю в стрільці січовій, у кривавий тан, визволяти братів українців з ворожих кайдан. А ми ці ворожі кайдани розірвемо, а ми нашу славну Україну, гей-гей, розвеселимо. А ми ці ворожі кайдани розірвемо, а ми нашу славну Україну, гей-гей, розвеселимо.
Once again, we want to thank you for bringing Ukrainian a little closer to our hearts. That was absolutely fantastic, and we We're grateful to the choir Dzherelo for their rendition today. Again, they're representing the Ukrainian Center, Utah, here. Well, we have just concluded the first part of our conference, Ukraine 1 year later. And now we begin the second session of the conference by having a keynote speaker on the current situation and framework of the situation that is taking place in Ukraine. We are so delighted and honored to have with us Dr. Steven Seegel. Professor Seegel, he's a professor of Slavic and Eurasian studies at the University of Texas at Austin. He graduated with both master's and PhD from Brown University in Russian and European history. His recent book publications are Map Men, Transnational Lives and Deaths of Geographers in the Making of East Central Europe, also Mapping Europe's Borderland, Russian Cartography in the Age of Empire, and Ukraine Under Western Eyes, the Bodham and Neonila Krashik Ukrainian Map Collection. I hope I pronounced some of those right, I hope. I apologize. Dr. Seegel has been a contributor to the 4th and 5th volumes of Chicago's International History Cartography series and has translated over 300 entries from Russia and Polish for the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Professor Seegel is a former director at Harvard University of the Ukrainian Research Institute's Summer Exchange Program. You can find him active on Twitter and currently is the host, author, feature podcast interviews on the popular New Books Network. He's the founder of the February 24th Archive, an ongoing community-driven digital project with thousands of threads, 8 gigabytes of tweets, and 15 million people in terms of audience reach that focuses on building global solidarities during Russia's war against Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a great honor to welcome Dr. Steven Seegel to Utah Valley University and to be our keynote speaker this morning. Dr. Seegel.
Thank you to Baldomero and to everyone who pronounces my name correctly. I'm not Steven Seegel, and so дуже дякую. Let's make sure we correct that error. My thanks for the invitation here to speak about a difficult topic. I think it's really important to recognize the music that we're hearing in our hearts, the war that's still going on, and my remarks are going to be about a war that's not just 1 year, but really 9 years. So in that spirit, let's begin. On the night of February 23rd, 24th, I collected all kinds of fears as I thought about genocide and death. Life has an odd way of being reduced. We try to make it more complicated by writing history books or dealing in lessons never to repeat or speaking of roadmaps. These things keep the gears of academia grinding or provide a diplomat's practical orientation. But for me and so many other Ukrainians, life stopped on February 24th, 2022, with chessboards and pipelines, geoeconomics and Archimedean points, seeing like a state, seeing like a god. Gods and maps can kill you. Unchecked, mono-civilizational maps that eliminate entire countries and cultures. Nations racially constituted get unduly labeled by ethnicity and nationality with east-west gradients, bold immovable lines, geopolitics into red-blue states and red lines, conflicts that seem in 2 dimensions. Humans get beaten up, erased by bullies. Mixed regions like Galicia, Halichina, or Donbass renamed, reincorporated, conquered, and oversimplified with histories of settlement and claims. The violence is what's there for every one of us to experience in every historical map, in claims to territory. Maps appear on walls, but they aren't just modes of curiosity. All maps of Ukraine are built from the heart, and all of us are dragged into it. I, as a historian, stoke this raw fear. I appear today giving you supply until we make a final raw choice about our values, whether to retreat or collaborate, be silent or resist. 9 years of a one-year war. My keynote on Ukraine is a sound map of time without the lazy PowerPoint that at least a generation of professors have relied on. Such pedagogy has its uses, but I'm tired of it. Listen to the music. Listen to Ukrainians. Close your eyes. Don't use your eyes. Know the deaths beyond the numbers. Hear the sirens. In darkened cities and villages destroyed by genocidal Russian missiles. Do it until you can't take it anymore. I reflect in 3 dimensions. First, on pacing, the biorhythms of echo-chambered communities of artists and professionals that are entrenched in universities and who don't speak to each other. Second, on tactics, the work of performing artists and activists, digital activists, on Twitter or wherever, as opposed to just plain activists. And third, on the reservoirs of feeling inside maps and across spectrums in contemporary Ukrainian studies. Ukrainian studies, this last one, is stylized and complex. We connect to people we connect to. We try to stay within our topics. We have networks of privilege which grow stale. We teach, but we don't listen. Part 1, time, parentheses, history. In the time of 2022 history, Ukrainian scholars I'd respected, who'd once taken buses, trains, and metros peacefully to work, were forced to flee all the familiar spaces they knew. They rescued their parents, children, dogs, and cats. They called for arms deliveries, NATO lines of defense, and common skies to be protected. Friends of mine fought on front lines, became medics, women too, with families in full panic. Journalists reached out, and the bureau chiefs on Twitter that follow me, I'd count in this category, as they donned protective gear or crawled in muddy trenches. I had no idea what to do, if I could do anything at all. February 24th, I started tracking more accounts. I gave 60 talks and consultations until I burned out. My tractor went on autopilot. We dug trenches, virtually and actually. We pulled each other together in our lives somehow. As I tweeted from Texas, I used the language of genocide and erasure, what I had studied as a graduate student and as a translator. This was a genocide and is a genocide from the outset. It was something I could and couldn't quite articulate about life and death. In history and time, February 24th became a limit experience, a new scale of violence. 1941 and 1939 transposed to Cold War 1962. Mariupol to Aleppo, Grozny, Yemen, Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile, Guernica. In reverse, or on top, more loosely, a kind of Noah's Ark, a biblical time, 2 by 2, side by each, rescued from Ukraine. Atrocity journalists taken hostage in panic, disfigured bodies under rubble, targeted kindergartens, distant geopoliticians from DC, more great power, man pomposity, power-flattering Siloviki from Moscow, complicity, future denizens of The Hague. Oligarchs, yachts and jets, cross-border prisoners of war, I'm adamant that these not be shown, dogs, cats, bunnies, roosters, and llamas, blocked trains, nuclear blackmail, NATO defense, crowded stations, rabbis fleeing unpretentiously, wasted taxes, tractors pulling tanks, jokes and blood-soaked memes, more despair, more anthems, more songs. Flowers and fields of grain poisoned, profanity unleashed by the brightest fucking minds, voters and survivors dead. Scraps of donated Nazi Z metal junk, radiation, more threats, sunflowers, more threats, grain, water, soil. Russia is a terrorist state, hashtag, for that's what it is. My brave Texas student from Dnipropetrovsk, already displaced with his family once in 2014, twittered at me on February 24th at 4 a.m., "I'm literally shaking," he wrote. He and I had been on a panel just 1 week earlier when historians of the smartest kind spoke of off-ramps for Putin. My Twitter archive was built in the spirit of raw emotion. Threads by aloof, rational analysts can't disguise it. I watch OSINT accounts. I read wrong analysis every day. Observers like Michael Kaufman, someone I admire, predicted the invasion, yet overestimated Russian military prowess. I watched intelligence landscapes changed, and I watched diplomats become slower and then faster and then slower again on the uptake because I fear the worst. Eventually, I would see 18 and 19-year-olds from Russia thrown into the meat grinder, or who got captured by Ukrainian defense forces as POWs. Will we ever see them again? I didn't share photos or videos per the Geneva Convention. I'd exchange hundreds of messages with friends from Ukraine who asked me point blank if they should leave and never come back. I put out words like dictatorship, war crimes, and genocide. And as I told my grad student, once from Donbass, then from Dnipro, now in Texas, Misha, get your parents out of there. This lifelong sadism, what Anna Politkovskaya and Boris Nemtsov and others had known, a world of destruction. Planned, intended, mapped, telegraphed. That coup that failed. Not that I wanted to be right. Maybe I was somewhat right. I'd been and have been in the field of Ukrainian studies for over 20 years. I studied at Harvard with Timothy Snyder. I was actually in his class when we learned Ukrainian and performed Ukrainian skits together. I wrote books that nobody reads, but you can read them if you want. I went on Twitter out of frustration, joining a community in the Trumpist years of outrage. I did 88 podcasts on New Books Network, about 35 of which had featured Ukrainian history, culture, and studies. I don't sleep, my friends. This is not a good thing. Here's what I admire. I admire voices who appear in support of Ukraine and Ukrainians since Euromaidan in November of 2013, who recognize that this war has been going on since 2014. Those voices should say, "Dear public, this war is wrong. I don't care. I'm against it. I support protesters, defense, and humanitarian aid. I don't need to win arguments for my ego. There are Nazis out there in the world, Goebbels goons. Why we need Ukraine? Let's write about it. Here are our limits to human empathy and humility, but our friends are in danger, so help us help them. Help us keep a civil society and a rule of law together, and prosecute those who deserve to be damned. On February 24th, 1 year, or now more than 1 year previous, history failed when time stopped. I had a plan to mobilize and connect people in the streets. I thought of recording protest using ethical tools. Sometimes maps are ethical for lived history, but I didn't care for likes because, to quote Mustafa Naim, likes don't count. Drafts backwards, correcting drafts, warnings of 1939, the books in your library that no one reads. The books of 1914. Who started that, by the way? From the present back to the past. Drawing from Polish Solidarność, Solidarity, Prague in the spring of 1968, Belarusian women, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, labor strikes of August 2020, Mustafa Naim, Tahrir, Eurasian color revolutions. All of these meet the Kremlin's disapproval. From modern America, it's hard to stand on firm moral ground. Let's be honest. The worlds we've ruined since Iraq and Afghanistan, or since the Spanish-American War, or since 1619, we're imbricated. We feel weak and insecure, insofar as the royal we can ever exist. And so I choose a different framework, peppered with Hannah Arendt, reviewing Vasily Grossman and Emanuel Ringelblum. Know their names. I hope to modulate in middles in support of Ukrainian history against colonial aggression. And therefore, I tweet and I toggle and I agitate for a transnational decolonial Ukraine in Europe and the EU in Ukraine. Responsibility for those in silence and fear. Part 2, place, parentheses, borderlands. I'm a geographer and a historian of ignored borderlands. I know how places like Odessa, Lviv, Lvov, Lemberg, Leopold, Kherson, Kharkiv, Kiev have mobilized. I know this because they sing. Their songs are songs against sirens, and these are counter weapons. Chervona Kalina, fierce resistance. The power of the displaced in solidarity, as Havel wrote about, the power of the powerless. Victims of Bucha, Borodyanka, and Izium. Before the 24th, I was in Ukrainian Jewish studies and the history of science, merrily writing books. Ukrainists in my field, and I work at the University of Texas at Austin, are firmly outnumbered by a Russocentric, scholarly industry with patience for only Moscow and St. Petersburg or Cold War détente. And with that come basic limits to compassion. We fight for those we know. One of my former advisors, the historian of Odessa, she died in 2018, Patricia Herlihy, one of my idols, a historian of Odessa and vodka. She wrote a book called Alcoholic Empire, which I love. She told me once, before she died, that she thought initially, by studying Ukraine, I'd commit career suicide. But this is just academic. My task is allyship, preservation, recovery, and reconstruction, because nobody knows when Russia's genocidal war will end. Place, borderlands. Ukraine is not just a borderland, Ukraina. It is a democratic country, independent since 1991. with a longer history of freedom, Taras Shevchenko, read his poetry, and a longer history of independence. Ukraine, not the Ukraine. The Ukraine, not na Ukraine. It was partitioned in 2014 and again in 2022. Lives of Ukrainians have been devastated, but nothing is erased even as the tractors pulling Z-tanks morph into symbolic resistance, guided by some sort of raw, emotive coping strategy. And so we write books, or articles, or threads. And this is what I do. Let's chronicle this bloody genocidal war, hoping that it ends. Memorize the accounts, learn the trolls, avoid them if you can, but at least note the fraudsters. Sometimes on Twitter, I manage to outwit the algorithms, and it requires a somewhat capacious memory. Journalists follow me, and I set them up with stories, often at 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. in multiple languages. I share maps and OSINT, think tank reports, investigations by Insider and Bellingcat. Why did I do this? Because I watched in horror as Russians tried to murder a Ukrainian Jewish elected president. Putinists have launched missiles, and we can map it all. The evidence is damning, to rain on Ukrainian churches, schools, museums, and apartment buildings. I hope the State Department continues its work. To my mind, 2022 academics in Germany and Russia, and American Russianist academics, were not really concerned with Ukraine until it was too late. And there are all kinds of hard reasons for that. Ukrainians lost their lives, families, flats, and jobs. I posted this letter in March of 2022, actually March 4th, 2022, at 4:21 a.m. on Twitter. As I lost my patience, one of my brilliant colleagues wrote the following, March 4th. The Russian army cleans Ukrainian cities off the face of the earth, destroying key infrastructure so that there is no water, light, heat. Rescuers can't dismantle the debris under the shelling. The Russian army is squeezing the civilians out of the cities so that they can then fight the rest as if they were terrorists. Yesterday, many of my Kharkiv residents, she's from Kharkiv, became refugees. This is what happens in life. Just yesterday, you were finishing an article and making plans for your vacation, and today you're standing with a bag at a station in Poltava, a good city. I've been trying to see it for a time, with your scared children and a cat in a carrier. I didn't have time to drive to pick up my mother. No gasoline, traffic jams and debris everywhere, burned cars, and again, shelling. And there's a chance to start your life with a clean leaf, but you're somehow not very happy about it. What's on my mind today? What's more terrifying than the destruction of my country? By the request of a nuclear button maniac, there will be a new world in which such crimes remain unpunished. The defeat of Hitler's Germany and the trial of Nazi criminals have created a confidence in several generations of Europeans that there is a global moral order in which evil is punishable. But for justice to prevail, a military defeat of the criminal regime is necessary, and there are problems with that in the nuclear era. So as soon as the maniac has a remission period, Western politicians will sit with him again at a very long table. This is and will be the collapse of the world order, the real end of history. The thought of my children and grandchildren having to live in this world of evil conquering makes me physically sick. End. My colleagues, and this was a mid-career scholar she is in Ukraine, were losing their homes, families, and livelihoods. Try to think of the largest catastrophe in your life and match it according to scale. This, I argue, is a moment of no pasaran. Cite the Spanish Civil War. Ukrainian journalists of all stripes really have every global and local right to be angry, to assign blame to perpetrators and deniers. The Ukrainian world, Sebuda Ukraina, is a world of resistance and mobilization and values, some of which have been lost. Not values governed by Kremlin BS history, but by choices with ethics. We who are there in Ukrainian history and culture and studies are there for anyone who looks. Call us up. Likes don't count. Our field has existed since the 1970s, if not the 1670s. And so I wish I had a better solution than this trauma bonding, for there are other traumas that bind in other countries that most certainly need help. Just look at Chechnya, Syria, Libya, and Iran. But let's just center Ukraine for a moment. We know the nature of Ukrainian terror, famine, Holodomor, war, and more war. I make it a constant point to emphasize the pain of Ukrainians because every family in the country has experienced it, some for multiple generations, and some who don't want to talk about it every single moment of every single day. I can't dismiss the portentous shame of Muscovites or people living affluently in capital cities. That's not enough. New Yorkers who don't leave the island, who insist on liberal Russians, who choose never to set foot in places like Kherson or sacrifice zones like Chernobyl. I wish I could send the basics of food, water, clothing, and electricity. I wish I could speak every day, and I can't, about Ukrainian open-air horrors and Russian torture chambers and the gulag that the Russian Federation has today become. Dumping grounds. I don't have the power of ministers to close the skies. Businessmen are like czars, far away. I get invited to speak on violence and Ukraine, and I know people in need. So let's call this global engagement, part 3, policy space and diplomacy. Why you are here. Real time, truth in a post-truth 21st century universe, an insistence on journalistic ethics, a need to create and develop portals for war crimes, testimonies, and oral history. History books to be written about Ukraine, Serhiy Yekelchik, Serhiy Plokhy, historians you should know. And read them, not because you want to read about them in a classroom and understand catastrophic premonitions. Read them for histories of ethnic cleansing, famine, civilian deaths, lessons unlearned, genocide prevention that fails. The abuses of maps and the abuses of the past, sins like colonialism, imperialism, and territorial revisionism. The power of homophobic men, the fantasies of power and revenge. Putler's rage mimicked by little Putins or little Stalins. Anger against women, LGBTQIA. What fuels us deftly as protesters, powerfully in searches for multi-allied truth, solidarity, peace, ultimately, but right now, territorial defense. This is what we do. There will be people to blame, and they will have names. So So let's talk about the practical. Who among us will master digital tools after February 24th, 2022? Invite diplomats. Yes, indeed, invite them. Write to journalists and diplomats. Become the best of protesting activists. Gather funds. Start small businesses. Build archives where museums and schools have been destroyed, using years of expertise to seek to assist the victims of unspeakable horrors. Illuminate, because you've read them, writers and diarists who chronicle genocidal crime. Turn off, if you can, the sirens in your mind. They're going to haunt our children's memories. Hold spontaneous concerts, share, anthologize. Pay for musicians, yes, pay them. Violins, dance, accordions, sound systems, and pianos. Give refugees shelter, your homes, education, and health. Have historical memory. Get out of capital comforts, bubbles, and cities. Know which words, as the Germans sometimes learned, are useless babble in rubble after 1945. Study languages. Study Ukrainian. Speak and focus. Focus on the marginalized and not just the numbers. And if you want something really practical, aim to reconstitute the EU and transatlantic security environments. Please arrest Putin and his Goebbelsian goons. I'm begging you, as they cross into your country's space. Viktor Orban, I'm looking at you. The Hague is waiting for them, the next Nuremberg moment, and reaching out to us in Ukrainian studies in the field for 10, 20, 30, and 40 years can't hurt. Yes, we know about Georgia. Yes, we teach about Chechnya and Syria. In fact, I assigned Anna Politkovskaya in my undergrad classrooms when I taught at the University of Northern Colorado every year. Every year every year they read her until she died, and then after she was killed, they read her some more. Multiple voices out of Ukraine are the key. I see the importance from 2022 to 2023 of saving and digitizing primary sources, taking these history courses. There are many, many, many things I can mention. I'll just mention two. One is the advocacy efforts of the Center for Urban History in Lviv. They have an enormous Telegram archive of Russian military bloggers and Russian military accounts. I think it's about 10 GBs. My Twitter archive is about 25 GBs right now. There's also an initiative called Saving Ukrainian Culture and History Online, or SUCHO, and I'm working with my professional organization, the Association for Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Languages, just to preserve things, sources, memes, songs, everything. My advice for digital activists is to become more civic-minded, but also to leave room for spontaneous interconnections. The incorporation of exchange, student exchange, is an ultimate platform for conversation. To get out of priesthoods of intelligentsias, this is the old Russian way since the 1830s and the 1840s, when they debated the Slavophiles and Westernizers and left Ukrainians out of the conversation. Account for positionality and intersectionality, subgroup segmentations, gay and queer Ukrainians, people who are activists, who put on Kiev pride. I think they're admirable. Call out West-splainers who don't speak Ukrainian or Russian and who have no training. Note fake accounts and grifters. There are a lot of them if you've just been reading about James Vasquez. Report unsourced news. It helps. Contemporary Ukrainian studies is anchored against the Kremlin's active denial of modern Ukrainian history. Thinkers like Ivan Franko, Drahomanov, for instance, read their works from the 19th century. They imagined what a Ukraine independent and free would look like. All of this can be done because the sirens haven't stopped at least not yet. We must do global engagement better. The Kremlin is no match for a multicultural, civic, and digitally activist Ukraine. You might think of it as a Goliath. It's not. In appealing for solidarity against aggression, Ukrainians are the global guiding stars of the moment, even when we get tired of the war reporting. So interested non-specialists, diplomats, and policymakers who are here, please continue these conversations. I think this will make democracy stronger in the way since at least 1968, Prague is a good reference, Central and East European traditions of anti-communist democracy and grassroots and civil rights and human rights movements guided the end of communism. So to conclude, Ukraine has a history, fine. Ukrainians have agency, also fine. These are mantras, and I would say in some ways meaningless cliches that Russians and Soviet Russian academics use to go anti-war, some are actually anti-war, нет войне, hunt for competitive jobs, we don't have enough of those, pretend to be liberal, this has failed, and cover up prior ignorance, this can be corrected. Ukrainians, if you've watched the Oscars, are not fooled by Navalny public relations campaigns in the world, any more than they're swayed by Kremlin propaganda. Ask a journalist, ask a Ukrainian journalist. Because, to quote Leonid Kravchuk, this is the first and last time I will quote him, Ukraine is not Russia. Ukraine, after World War I, fits awkwardly into Western schemes of national self-determination, whether they're Wilsonian or Leninist. And the reason for this is Ukraine had territory on both the winning and losing side in the alliance system of World War I. Think about Galicia, for example, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, a country of 44 million people with all its displaced persons internally and externally has the right to sovereignty, voting rights, elections, civil society, and a basic rule of law in EU worlds, as well as its own military defense and security. Ukraine actually has a geographical advantage. Ukraine can be a center and a periphery. Call this a post-West scenario. Call February 24th a post-Cold War failure. Every life requires choices. We tractor on. Victims of Russian violence and Putinist war crimes, for they are war crimes, know that there is a clear aggressor. Wars and revolutions are such catalyzing political events because they don't have no choice options, even if the Swiss pretend to be neutral. There was no one single factor that started 1914, yet wars have aggressors, and aggressors can be tried. Armies cross borders, planes violate airspaces, countries can have dictatorial regimes, even, yes, the United States of America. We consult dull textbooks, the books I've written that no one reads, or build straw men, like the end of history, to find something to talk about and pigeonhole inconvenient generational change. I still don't really buy the argument that all history pivots around a single generational experience. A 9/11, a 2/14, or 24/2, or a 1989, or 1968, or an 1848, for that matter. The history and historiography of Eastern Europe lacks consensus, and moreover, wars don't end. And because wars don't end, trauma becomes a tool for nuance, which actually blinds us on screens. All empires and regimes get defeated. Ukrainians will win. Zapiremohu. This is objectively true, but I can't prove it, and that's why I'm shaking my head. Which is to say, the history of a better Europe and a better transatlantic future is pinned on Ukraine and Ukrainians in 2023, as it was during Euromaidan in 2013-14 and the Orange Revolution of 24. A profound wish for liberty, victory, justice, and a future over fear. Zapiremohu, for victory, not just for peace. It's impossible to predict the future. Will sanctions work? Yes and no. Let's talk about it. Will Ukrainians surrender? I doubt it. Will the war end? All wars end, and all wars linger. Thank you today for listening to my sound map of time. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. That was remarkable. It was hard to hold the tears. Thank you. That was inspiring, and we are so honored that that message has been recorded, broadcast, and for us to be able to review and to listen again. So now at this point, we're going to have a break, and while we set up the stage for the panel, we have the diplomats that will be part of the panelists. They will be moderated by Dr. Fred White. And so we will like to resume at right 11 o'clock sharp, and the stage is going to be set up. I want to thank all of the individuals that have participated this morning. Madame Denise Shen, thank you very much for your message, as well as Jonathan Freedman and Kathren Brown and all of the beautiful choir once again. So let's resume back in 12 minutes, and the panel will begin. Thank you.